Hi everyone, my name is Bobby Hritz. I work with Cross IT Services and Solutions as a data systems architect, which is pretty much just a fancy way of saying that I build databases in FileMaker to solve all sorts of problems. Today we're going to be talking about how to build a popover menu with FileMaker, just using native FileMaker tools, nothing else, nothing too fancy. Our goal will be to take a menu like this, which so often appears at the top of our layouts and solutions, and make it into a very nice, modern popover menu. The FileMaker features we're going to be using today are a popover button, a slide control, and a button bar, all of which are features that have been added within the past couple years of FileMaker, so you'll want to make sure that you're using a more current version of FileMaker if you're trying to employ this technique. What we have here is just a quick example of what a popover menu looks like, just in case you stumbled upon this and weren't quite sure what we're exactly talking about. So the idea is I just click here. I have all of my menu objects now listed. They're not cluttering up our header. Additionally, we could also add in submenus. So it really gives us the opportunity to add in more menu objects and layouts, place for our users to go to. The overall goal then, by the end of this little tutorial, you should be able to build a menu like that and employ it in your own solution. Alright, let's get started. Let's go into layout mode. The first thing we're going to want to do is create a button to actually click on. And we're going to need to place a button for our users to click on the layout. So I'm going to select the button here, select the button object, I'm just going to drop it right on there onto my layout. So we'll need some sort of icon there. Now we could use any sort of icon, any sort of wording, but typically when menus are created like this, they'll have a little what we call a hamburger symbol featured right there. And what we'll want to do too is we really don't want the appearance of a button. So we're actually going to hide all of the styling lines. We're going to make the fill transparent. Essentially, the only thing we want to see is the actual icon. We'll go here to our button icon within our inspector. We'll make it a nice white icon. And another thing we'll want to do is we'll want to edit the hover statuses and press and focus statuses for our button as well. So I'm just going to go through and do that real quick. Again, just removing the fill, removing the border. If it is pressed, we'll want to make sure that the shadow is removed as well. And if it's in focus, we want to make sure any sort of shadow is removed as well. Alright, looks good. So we have our button. Now we need to get our popover in place. So again, we'll go up here to our button object. We'll select popover button. We'll just place it right there in our layout. So what I always do is I always remove the popover title. Typically with menus, you really don't need a title. It's self-explanatory. It's a menu. So we really don't want to see any wording. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to squeeze that down real tight to the layout. Then another thing that's really important, this is kind of one of the key features, is we want to name this popover. We want to give it a name. In our case, we're going to name it menu. This will allow us to actually go to this popover menu from a script or from a button action. So I'm going to go back to my button, the one that is actually going to be shown to us. And I'm going to give it a go to object command. Again, this is the crucial step that will allow users to click that button and go to the popover. Let's go into browse mode and see how we did. Perfect. So we have our two objects. If I click on the hamburger button, my popover comes up. Looking good so far. A couple things though. One, we still have that little popover. The actual popover button's still there. We don't want that. The other thing too is we have this little doohickey, which is a technical term, by the way. We really don't want to see that either though. So let's go back into our layout mode. To hide the button, if we go to our inspector, on the last tab is where conditional hiding is. This is again a newer feature, so you'll definitely need to have a more recent version of FileMaker for the conditional hiding. We're seeing it at a value of 1, so we always want this object to be hidden. More importantly too, we'll want to make sure that the apply in find mode checkbox is checked. Without that being checked, if you go into find mode, you will see this object. We don't want that. So make sure that's checked. Go back into browse mode real quick. Beautiful. So that actual popover button is gone. Notice though that the popover still exists. The other thing we need to get rid of is that little doohickey. There's multiple different ways and variations you could do it. What I like to do is I like to make the actual popover a solid color. I'm going to remove the line formatting. I'm going to give it no corner radius. Here's the key part. So I'm going to take my outer shadow. The outer shadow is actually what's going to cover up the doohickey. So I'm going to make the horizontal and vertical offset 0. And I'm going to make it the exact same color as my popover. I'm going to give it a blur of 0. And what I'm going to do, just give it a spread of 30. Now you might want to tweak that depending on where your popover is, but that's kind of the key step in making that doohickey disappear. And I'm just going to stretch it down so it takes up the bulk of my layout. And I'm going to anchor it, again, so I'm anchoring this popover downwards so that way it'll extend as my page extends. Switch into browse mode real quick just to check our progress. I click on the hamburger menu button. We have a nice, beautiful popover. So we kind of have the framework of our popover menu laid out. It works. It's beautiful. Now we need to add buttons to it. I like to use a button bar for this, simply because the button bar, as it stretches, will retain some sort of consistency with how the button spacing is. It'll stretch as you would expect it to. So I'm just going to kind of stretch out my button bar, take up the bulk of my menu. I'm going to anchor it downwards, that way as my popover menu expands, so will the button bar. One key feature of this is that I'm actually going to make the button bar clear, because we want to have the same background as our popover. And I'm going to do that for all the states of that button. So I'm going to go through active, inactive, my hover states, press states, in focus states. All those are going to be clear for the fill of the button bar. I'm going to get rid of any inner shadow. All right, good. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to type in some text for the buttons. For our purposes, I'm not really too worried about what they are. I'm just putting in, like contacts. We'll throw in an inventory section. Those are pretty typical of any sort of solution or database. The one thing that we like to do when we have our popover menus is we'll add in a Logoff button. Now with FileMaker, isn't really necessary. You could just exit out of the system. But a lot of users are used to using software that have a log off button or a sign off button, some way that they can actually visually see that they are signing off. So it's, again, a nice little aesthetic that can really improve the user experience, which is ultimately our end goal. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make our text a little bit bigger. Ooh, possible boo-boo moment I just made. So notice I'm still in focus. So when I click out of that, my text size for my button bar stay the same because I wasn't in the inactive part. So I want to make sure we make sure that when you change the text, it's in the appropriate part of the button. I'm also going to give it a nice little trebuchet font. We'll give it a bold status. And then what I like to do too is I like to make sure that it's the same across all the hover states. This is totally optional depending on what you guys want or what your customers want. I just like to have some consistency with that. So what we have here, a button bar on a popover menu. We're going to make our Logoff button actually close out the file. And voila, we have a popover menu with some buttons. Looks good. You go in Find mode, and it looks the same, nothing weird there. So the only thing left for us to do now at this point is to actually add in a hierarchy of submenus. You might not necessarily need to do this, but it's definitely a nice feature to be able to add into a solution. To do this, we're going to need to use a slide control feature. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm actually going to put the slide control panel out here. Now you can put directly on the popover, but I've noticed just for trying to manage it, it's a little bit easier doing it outside the popover. What we're going to want to do, similar to what we did at the button bar, we're going to want to make it the slide control invisible. Another thing I like to do is I like to try and remove as much formatting from it as possible. So I'm actually going to remove the padding from the slide control. And that's usually on most of the default slide panels. You'll find that they do have that little additional bottom padding that can throw things off a little bit. To adjust the color of the slide panel, I go to Slide Control Panel in my inspector. Again, we'll make the fill invisible, and same thing with the lines on the border. I'm also going to click this button to remove the navigation dots. It might be a nice feature to have if you're developing, but by the time you ship it out to the end user, you probably want those navigation dots to be gone. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to uncheck the Enable Swipe Gestures, just so that there's no unintended consequences if this layout ends up being used on an iPad. So I have my perfectly clear slide panel. I'm going to shrink it down a little bit. All I'm going to do is I'm just going to drop that on there. Now you might find that it's actually easier to leave the slide panel being visible still with a background color until you get those buttons on there. It can be kind of tricky trying to line things up without seeing the panel. So so what I did now is I just put that slide panel on my popover. What I'm going to want to do though is I'm going to want to rename my popover, because when I click that menu hamburger, I don't want it going just to the popover. I want it going to the specific slide that I have my main menu buttons on. So I'm actually going to name the slide panel to be menu. So we have our main menu of buttons on a slide panel on a popover. To get a hierarchy, all we do is we utilize these other slides. Now I could add, remove as many slides as I want. Again, for this case, since we only have one, we're only going to create one hierarchy. We'll just have the two slide panels. I'm going to name it submenu 1. Now in terms of naming, you will probably want to use something a little more specific to what you're doing. For our purposes though, submenu 1 worked perfectly. And once you get that submenu, you'll want to put your buttons on there. Since I'm lazy, well, I call it efficient, but since I am, we'll go with efficient. Since I'm efficient, I copy and pasted mine. And again, so this is our submenu now. So if let's say you click into contacts, you want a submenu of people and maybe companies. My FileMaker will cooperate. There we go. And now since we're on a submenu, instead of log off, we'll want to be able to go back to the main menu. So to do that, we just use a go-to object. and we give it the name menu to go back to. That's the object it's going back to. So we have two panels with buttons on them. What we need now is we need a way to go from one panel to the next, so we'll just choose our contacts button here. We will say go to object, sub menu, and then when users click that button, it should navigate them to that sub menu. One more thing, I'm going to make sure that our buttons are lined up correctly. So I just looked here and here at our left and top alignments and compared them. Let's see, scrolling through, yeah, looks like they're in about the same position. So let's check how we did. Alright, so we're back in browse mode here. We have a nice button that our users can click to pull up a menu. Our menu pulls up. Everything's nice, one color, no little doohickeys on the side. I could click on a button and it'll bring me to a sub-menu. I can then click back and it'll take me back to that sub-menu. And there we go. We have a very nice, very visually aesthetically pleasing popover menu. One of the best things about using this strategy to build a navigation for our users is that it can be implemented across the multiple different versions of FileMaker that exist. So FileMaker WebDirect, FileMaker Go, and FileMaker Pro can all utilize this technique to create a menu. So you can create a very nice universal menu for all your layouts. It's visually pleasing, it saves space, and it gives users what they expect out of applications and software nowadays. I think that's it. Thank you guys very much for taking the time to listen to me. I hope you guys found it useful. Please leave a comment, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.